What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Motoroso.com, your dedicated mods marketplace. And today we're in studio with our buddy Johan's 4Runner, and we just got finished installing this bumper, LED light bar, and winch combination. Now, Johan actually uses this 4Runner. This is a 2016, and as you'll see in the install portion, it's dirty. He takes this thing off-roading a lot, and he wanted a little bit better off-road protection in a bumper, something that looked a little more aggressive, and also wanted to add some lighting and that winching capability. And if you've looked in the aftermarket at the options out there, you know that sometimes this can get really expensive. Now, Johan really likes riding motorcycles, so it's not his most top priority to spend $5 grand on this stuff on his 4Runner. So we want to find him a really cost-effective option. And that's why I wanted to share with you the setup that we've gone with here, because it's all a really, really good deal for what it is. Let's start with the Westin Pro Series front bumper, which is a brand new option from Westin. Now, this is configurable as it's a shorty bumper instead of a full width, which means it's lighter weight and of course less materials, easier to ship. So it's overall just going to be less expensive. And it's configurable to be just the bumper by itself. It can have a round bull bar or an angular bull bar, so you can actually configure it to make it look the way that you want it to. Now, the whole thing's made out of 10 gauge steel, which is really beefy, but down in the hidden winch mount, they use a full 4 gauge steel, which is really, really thick, and that can support up to 12,000 pound winch. Now, this is just a 9,500 pound winch we've put in here, but he knows if he's going to use more, he can go up to a bigger winch if necessary. It's also got this opening for a single row 20-inch LED light bar, and it's coated in an E-coat powder coating, which is super tough to resist corrosion and stand up to the punishment of the trail. It also includes the skid plate and a mounting point for your D-rings. Now, the D-rings are not included. Those were an added extra that we added on here. And all of that comes to you for under $800, and we'll put a link to that in the description. For the light bar, we use the Westin Extreme 20-inch single row LED. Now, that's 5-watt Cree LEDs in there, and they put out almost 10,000 lumens out of a single row 20-inch bar, which is pretty impressive. The whole thing's under $230. It's aluminum housing, has those big heat sinks. It includes all the wiring and harnesses that you need, and it's sealed against moisture and dust. And this thing really performs pretty well for how small it is. If you've looked into winches, you also know these things can get crazy expensive, especially if you configure them with the synthetic rope. And of course, that synthetic rope is lighter and it's actually safer. It's not going to saw you in half if the thing snaps. So a lot of people really opting for those, but they can get to be very, very pricey. Luckily, Superwinch now offers the Tiger Shark 9500 SR, which is under $700, and it includes that synthetic rope for that safety. And it's a 9,500 pound capacity winch, which is pretty good for almost anything that you're going to be doing out there in this type of a vehicle. And the winch comes with this beautiful billet machined aluminum fairlead with the Superwinch logo embossed in it. It looks really, really nice, and it's recessed into the bumper there, as you can see. And of course, it comes with a 10-foot cable and that weatherproof remote for operating it, which can be reached right through here. So the whole setup came in at a really, really great price, much more affordable than you're most often going to find. We put links to everything in the description. And next up, we're going to show you how to install all of this. Now, we also installed Westin's Outlaw side steps, and those just match this truck really, really nicely, and those come in at under $700.
Remove all the pop clips holding the radiator shroud and the front fascia in place. Remove the 10mm bolt on the hood latch. Remove the 3 10mm bolts in the fender well on each side. Remove the 10mm bolts from the bottom of the bumper. Disconnect the fog light wiring harnesses. This is the trickiest part of removing the front fascia. You need a thin plastic panel lever to reach into the panel gap as seen here. Lift up on the thin black tabs that retain the rear leading edge of the bumper. Do not just pull outward on the bumper because it will break. Done properly, this should pull out nicely with no effort. You're ready to pull off the OEM front fascia. It's recommended that you remove the center mesh black plastic section of the OEM bumper before cutting. We didn't do this. Everything is okay, but we probably should have done that. Begin cutting out this lower section of the OEM front fascia along the shown path, making sure to reference your instructions. It is important not to cut entirely all the way up to the mesh area. You can use a number of cutting tools, from a very sharp razor blade to a Dremel tool, but we used an angle grinder with a cutting desk and it worked really well. Continue to cut the bumper along the top seam of the bumper section as shown here. You may need to use a knife to finish the inside corners to avoid cutting in too deeply. Clean up the edges of the cut bumper with a knife or file as necessary. Back on the truck, remove the plastic skid plate. Remove the 8 17mm bolts holding the bumper impact bar in place and keep these OEM bolts. Lastly, remove the splash guards near the radiator. If installing an LED light bar, start by installing the brackets in the correct position on the light bar first. Then loosely mount the LED light bar with the bolts going into the bumper facing the wrong direction as shown. This allows clearance from the bolt so that you can adjust the position of the light bar. Once it's in position, then tighten the light bar brackets on the light bar. Now you can remove the 2 light bar mounting bolts and reverse them and put them in properly with the bolt head coming from the front of the bumper. Make any final adjustments and then tighten down completely. If installing a winch, you can now mount the winch fair lead into the mounting position on the bumper. Gently place the square retained nuts inside the base of the winch. Using something to support the bumper, place the bumper in front of the vehicle. Now, without letting the retained nuts slide out, lift the winch up carefully and set it inside the bumper over the mounting holes. Apply Loctite to the winch mounting bolts. Secure the winch to the bumper with the supplied hardware. This assembly now weighs quite a bit, so with someone to spot you, lift the bumper into place and loosely secure it on each side with the OEM bolts. Using the 2 supplied M12 bolts, loosely snug the side bracket of the bumper to the frame. Check everything for alignment and then fully tighten all bumper mounting hardware. If you're using the optional Westin bull bar, now would be a good time to install that. The ground cable on our winch came loose. This allows you to determine which direction you want it to go off the winch. We routed it behind the winch and then we tightened the connection for the ground cable using the access point from below the bumper. We ran both cables behind the winch and then across and up into the battery compartment. Connect the black wire to the negative battery terminal. Connect the red wire to the positive battery terminal using the provided 50 amp fuse. Using the winch controller, test the winch to make sure you've installed everything correctly. Now let's wire up the light bar. Using the supplied wiring harness, begin by mounting the relay to the side of the engine bay. Make sure you mount it in a position where the wiring harness and the switch will be able to reach the light bar and the cab. Feed the light bar connection down to the bumper and connect the wiring harness to the light bar. Use zip ties to clean up all the wiring and tuck it out of the way. Now remove the fuse before connecting the wiring harness to the battery terminals. Connect the wiring harness to the battery terminals, red to positive and black to negative. Now reinsert the fuse and test the light bar to make sure everything has been installed correctly. Now let's wire your switch into the cab. Remove the switch from the wiring harness. Using a screwdriver or another sharp thin tool, poke a hole in the rubber grommet in the firewall from the cab. Using electrical tape, secure the wiring to the screwdriver and slowly draw it into the cab. Now choose a good location and mount your switch inside the cab or connect it to an aftermarket auxiliary switch. Now let's get everything put back together. Replace the plastic splash guards. You'll need to use a cutting tool to trim the plastic splash guards to prevent interference with the bumper. Reinstall the pop clips to secure the splash guards. It's time to replace the OEM front fascia. Take your time with this process as you run the risk of damaging the paint or breaking the thin plastic as you work it behind your new Westin bumper. Make sure to align the rear leading edge of the front fascia with the thin plastic retainer clips and then press them in to secure. Replace all the 10mm fender well bolts. And replace the 10mm screw on the hood latch. Reinstall the radiator shroud cover with pop clips. To install the skid plate, remove the front 2 M8 winch mounting bolts. Attach the skid plate to the bumper using the 2 mounting bolts and nuts on either side of the skid plate. This is challenging because there is not a lot of room to work with. Reinstall the 2 front winch mounting bolts. Now unfortunately, we had to go to the hardware store and buy longer bolts to make this work properly. Attach your winch hook to the winch cable and install the cotter pin. If you have D-rings, you can install them on your bumper now and hang your hook from the D-ring. Reconnect your fog light wiring harnesses. Install the 2 side brackets for the fenders to secure the fender liners. If you're running larger wheels and tires, you can drill a hole in the fender liner a little further back, and then you can secure it to this hole, and this will increase the wheel clearance and avoid rubbing. Use the provided hardware to secure this bracket to the fender liners. You've just finished installing your Westin bumper, light, and winch. Congratulations.
All right, hope you found that video helpful. If you need any of these products, please visit us at Motoroso.com. You can reach us toll free at 833-668-6767.